I'm Kelsey Jack. I'm at UC Santa Barbara, and I'm going to be talking about a project that's been very fun for me to work on. It's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, and the motivation for the paper is trying to understand more about how scarcity, basically the conditions of being poor, affect decision making. There's a growing literature on understanding kind of the psychology of poverty, and that's really the literature that we're trying to speak to. So the approach that we take is to do some very detailed data collection in Zambia, asking households, farming households, to make trades over sort of standard household items, where we're borrowing from this large lab literature that finds existence for what's called an endowment effect, that people hang on to things that they currently have for too long. So we can test some predictions about sort of how good people's decision making is using this particular measure. And what we find is that while on average, sort of biases in decision making or sort of decision anomalies are very, very persistent, that they fluctuate very consistently with how poor people are at any given point in time. And so in particular, we use three sources of variation. In the cross-section, poorer households are actually more likely to behave rationally, more likely to trade. We look seasonally at times of the year when people are poorer versus at harvest time when they're richer. We find that when people are poor, they're also more likely to trade, to behave rationally. And then finally, we use some experimental variation in the context of an RCT going on to see that, again, in this randomized variation, when people are poorer, again, they behave more rationally. We find some evidence that this is consistent with kind of rational inattention, as opposed to some kind of cognition impairment that happens when people are poor.